Okay, guys, in this lesson, we are going to look at the structure of the skin and its functions. So first, let's look at the different layers of the skin. There are three main layers that we'll look at. The first is the epidermis, which is the outermost layer. This is a layer of keratinized, stratified, squamous epithelium. So that means it has keratin, it has multiple layers, and the top layer is flat. Remember that keratin is what helps waterproof our skin. So the next is a layer called the dermis. This is where we find our blood vessels, our nerve endings, we find our hair follicles, we find sebaceous glands or oil glands, and we also find our sweat glands. Now you'll notice the difference here between thick skin and thin skin is that thick skin tends to not have the hair or the oil glands, while the thin skin does. So thick skin would be like the bottom of your feet or the palms of your hands, and then the thin skin is, well, everywhere else. Now, underneath the dermis is a layer called the subcutaneous layer or subcutaneous tissue. Now, technically, this is not actually part of the skin, but it's what the skin is connected to, and it plays a huge role in the benefits of the skin. It is made of areolar connective tissue and adipose tissue, which is otherwise known as fat. So again, it helps connect our skin to whatever the structure is underneath it, whether that's muscle or cartilage or bone. So now the skin has a lot of really cool functions, so let's just quickly touch on each of them. First is protection. Our skin is literally our barrier against the outside world, right? So it protects us from injury. It helps keep out infection, helps protect us from UV radiation, we hope. And we also see our skin protecting us in terms of fluid balance. So not only does it help hold our fluids in so we don't get too dehydrated, but it also helps keep water out. Now remember that keratin we talked about, it helps to waterproof us, but over time with too much water exposure, the skin starts to prune up. We've all seen this when we're in the bath, right? Because that keratin's being used up and it's being broken down. That is a sign it is time to get out of the bathtub. But once we dry out, the keratin's restored and we're protected once again. Now, the skin also plays a huge role in sensory detection. There are a lot of specialized neurons or nerve endings in the dermis that help us to detect different things like light touch, deep pressure, different temperatures, and pain. So without these things, it's really difficult to prevent injury. It's difficult to get our bearings, kind of know what's happening in our world. So it's really, really important that we're able to detect those things. Now, another main function of the skin is thermoregulation, which is regulating our temperature. Remember, the body temperature wants to be 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit or 37 degrees Celsius. So there's three main ways that our bodies lose heat. One is by radiation, and that's when the heat gets transferred without having to be in contact. So think about your radiator at home or a fireplace. That's heat transfer to you without you actually having to touch that thing, but you're still getting the heat from it. There's also evaporation. So when water gets too hot, it evaporates and it takes the heat with it. So the surface that it was on gets left cooler than it was. And then the last is conduction. This is what we know about heat transfer, is this is when it transfers through contact. So if you actually touch something that's hot, then you'll feel the heat. Or maybe if you use even an ice pack, we're using the principle of conduction to regulate our temperature externally. So let's see what this looks like in the body. So let's say that we need to lose some heat. Our temperature's too hot. Remember, our bodies want to be right about 98.6 or 37 degrees Fahrenheit or Celsius. So if we're too hot, our blood vessels in the skin are going to vasodilate. That means that they get bigger. They get bigger, we get more blood flow to the skin, and that blood is where all our heat is. So we end up losing some of that heat by radiation off the skin, which is our goal. So think about when you're hot, you get really flushed and you turn red because of this blood flow to the skin. Your skin gets really hot and we're able to lose some of that heat by radiation so we can cool down. We also start sweating, so then we can lose some of that heat by evaporation as well. Again, the whole goal is just to get back to a normal temperature. So what happens if we need to gain some heat? So our temp is too cold. We need to get warm. We're actually going to do just the opposite. Those vessels are going to constrict. and they're going to get smaller. So we're going to have less blood flow to the skin. And if we have less blood flow to the skin, we have less heat being lost off of the skin. So we can actually warm up a little bit better. And then the other thing we'll see is shivering, and that's muscle contraction. Muscle contraction is a great way to produce more heat. And of course, there's other hormonal activities going on in the body as well to help us increase our temperature. But all of that comes from the sensory detection in the skin and then the core body temperature. So a few other miscellaneous functions of skin. The skin is responsible for vitamin D production. So when we take in sunlight through our skin, it actually goes to stimulates the liver to turn cholesterol into vitamin D. But all that process starts with that sunlight coming to the skin. We also see excretion of wastes in the form of urea in our sweat. And we also see identification through the skin with things like fingerprints and birthmarks. So let's recap. The skin has 3 layers: the epidermis, the dermis, and the subcutaneous tissue, which, like I said, is not technically a part of the skin, but it plays a huge role. And that's where the hair follicles are housed. The primary functions of the skin are protection, sensory detection, and thermoregulation, plus a couple of other miscellaneous functions that are still really important. Remember that there's 3 different ways we can lose heat or transfer heat. That's radiation, evaporation, and conduction. And the skin plays a huge role in that, especially through heat loss by radiation through the skin because of our vasodilating and constricting, sweating, and being a part of the shivering process. All right, guys, those are the basics you need to know about skin. Now go out and be your best selves today. And as always, happy nursing.